My sister handed out first-class tickets to everyone in the airport lounge, then dropped an economy seat into my hand and laughed, "You're used to the back anyway." I stayed quiet until the pilot walked to row 34E mid-flight, saluted me, and said, "General, ma'am." The captain's heels came together with a sound like a rifle bolt closing. His right hand rose to his temple in a sharp, precise military salute, the kind you only throw when rank demands it, when protocol isn't optional, when the person in front of you has earned something that doesn't wash off in an airplane lavatory. 200 passengers turned their heads in the same direction, toward the woman in seat 34E, the woman with dried coffee on her jacket, the woman holding a crumpled economy boarding pass, the woman who, for the last 40 minutes, her sister had been quietly pitying from the front of the plane. I stood up slowly, the way I always do, unhurried, deliberate, spine straight, and I returned the salute. And I want to be precise about the sound that moved through that cabin in the 3 seconds after. It wasn't gasping. It wasn't applause. It was something quieter and more unsettling. 200 people simultaneously revising a story they thought they already understood. I heard it move from the back rows forward, like wind through a field. And somewhere in first class, I knew without looking that my sister's face had gone the color of old chalk. She had handed me that boarding pass like a verdict, like a final word on exactly who I was and where I belonged. She had laughed, actually laughed, and my father had laughed with her, and my mother had covered her mouth just barely, and her husband Vance had swirled his champagne and said something about standby and government salaries. They had been wrong about my salary for 15 years. They had been wrong about nearly everything else too, but they were about to find out about Vance first. I need to back up, because the airport lounge wasn't where this started. This started the way most things in my family start, with a story they'd all agreed on years ago and never bothered to check. The story was this. Harper does computer stuff for the military, basically IT, tech support in a uniform, useful probably in a quiet government paycheck kind of way, but not the sort of thing you mention at dinner parties unless the conversation has already stalled. I never corrected them. I want to explain why, because I think people assume it was either humility or stubbornness, and it was neither. It was closer to efficiency. My family had a particular quality I recognized early. They were not curious about things that didn't directly affect them. You could correct them once and they would nod, and then 2 months later the old version of the story would be back, unchanged, because the new information hadn't been useful enough to stick. So I stopped correcting. My name is Harper Lynn Calloway. I am 38 years old. I hold the rank of Brigadier General in the United States Army, assigned to the Defense Cyber Operations Command, which I am not going to describe in detail because some of it is classified, and the rest of it would take longer than this story. What I will tell you is that I have been in this work for 16 years, that I have a security clearance that requires a background investigation longer than most people's employment histories, and that my government-issue phone, a hardened, encrypted device that looks unremarkable and does things that would make a civilian's eyes water, goes everywhere I go, including seat 34E. I had been back in the continental United States for 11 days after a 7-month deployment when my mother called and told me the family was taking a trip to Hawaii, Arthur and Sandra Calloway's 40th anniversary. Chloe, my younger sister by 4 years, and her husband Vance had organized everything: flights, hotel, reservations, the whole architecture. It was generous. I told my mother I was glad. She said, "Gio, Chloe got everyone's seats. Just use the confirmation she sends you." I said that was fine. I should have booked my own. My sister Chloe is the kind of beautiful that she treats as a professional qualification. She married Vance Aldridge 3 years ago at a venue that cost more than my first car, my second car, and a year's worth of groceries combined. Vance runs government contracting work, defense sector, he always said vaguely, aerospace and systems, and he wore it the way some men wear watches, conspicuously, constantly, as evidence. He had the particular confidence of someone who has never been told no by anyone he respected. I had met him 6 times before this trip. He had asked me what I did twice, listened for about 4 seconds each time, and pivoted back to himself with the ease of a man for whom other people's answers are just pauses between his sentences. I did not dislike him exactly. I was cautious about him. There is a difference. The confirmation email from Chloe arrived 3 days before departure. 1 booking for 4 passengers in business class, upgraded to first at the gate: Chloe, Vance, Arthur, Sandra. 1 separate economy booking: Harper, seat 34E, middle seat, row 34 of 38. I read it twice. I told myself it was a mistake. Tight booking window, maybe. I emailed Chloe. She read it. I could see the read receipt, and didn't respond for 18 hours. When she did, she wrote, "Oh no, that flight is totally full in business now. So sorry," with a little sad face emoji that she had clearly enjoyed typing. I checked the flight manifest through a channel that is available to me and not to most people. Business class was 62% occupied. I booked nothing else. I packed my old military backpack, canvas, worn at the straps, 1 embroidered patch from a unit I served with in 2014 that means nothing to a civilian and everything to anyone who's been there, and I drove to the airport. The VIP lounge at O'Hare was where it landed fully. My family stood together in a cluster near the window, holding their gold-trimmed first-class boarding passes the way people hold props in photographs, slightly too consciously, slightly too high. My father was in his blazer. My mother had the good scarf on. Chloe was in something white and deliberate. Vance was in a sport coat and had a glass of champagne, which at 10:40 in the morning is a choice. I walked in with my backpack and my economy ticket. Chloe saw me, and something moved moved across her face. Satisfaction, I think, though she dressed it up as concern. She reached into her small leather bag and produced my boarding pass with the tips of 2 fingers. Seat 34E, she said. The smirk was slight, but it was there, right next to the bathroom. Should feel like home. My father laughed. A real laugh. Easy. Unguarded. My mother covered her mouth. Vance swirled his glass and said, "Honestly, you're lucky we didn't put you in standby. Government salary, right?" And then looked at my father like they were sharing something, and my father smiled like they were. I looked at the 4 of them for a moment, took in the whole tableau. "Thank you," I said, and took the boarding pass and picked up my backpack and walked to the economy line. I did not argue. I did not correct. I did not explain. I had learned a long time ago that the best response to people who have underestimated you is patience. Patience is its own kind of precision instrument. You keep it sharp. You put it away. You wait for the moment it's actually needed. I did not know, standing in that economy line, that the moment was going to come at 37,000 feet over the Pacific. But it did. Seat 34E was exactly what Chloe had promised. Narrow, middle. The lavatory was 1 row behind me, and the smell was already there before we'd left the gate. That particular blend of industrial sanitizer and recycled air that becomes deeply familiar on long flights and never becomes pleasant. The man to my left had his elbow confidently in the shared space. The woman to my right was already asleep against the window. I buckled in, stowed my backpack under the seat, and watched through the gap in the curtain as my family settled into their first-class pods at the front. Chloe glanced back down the aisle as she passed, found me with her eyes, and gave me a look that I can only describe as comprehensive. It took in the middle seat, the backpack, the worn jacket, and filed it all under something she had already decided. "Comfortable back here?" she said. "Very," I said. She laughed and kept walking. The flight took off at 12:08 p.m. For the first 20 minutes I read. I have a habit of carrying physical books on flights because it is one of the few environments where I cannot be reached, and I try to use it as such. Then Vance appeared. He came down the aisle from first class with the ease of a man who believes the world is organized for his comfort. He had a paper cup of coffee. He stopped at my row, not because my row was his destination, but because the turbulence had shifted slightly, and he'd grabbed the headrest, and when he steadied himself, the cup tilted. The coffee went across my left shoulder and down the front of my jacket. Hot. Not scalding, but deliberate in the way accidents that aren't quite accidents always feel deliberate. Vance looked at the jacket, at me. "Military training doesn't teach you how to hold a drink," he said. Then he slid past me into the empty aisle seat like he had always planned to sit there, just needed an excuse to claim the row. Opened his laptop and connected to the plane's Wi-Fi. I sat with the coffee cooling on my jacket and thought about what I wanted to do, not what I was going to do. I already knew that. I was thinking about whether it was proportionate, whether I was reacting to the coffee or to 15 years of accumulated erosion, whether the thing about proportionality is that sometimes the proportionate response to 15 years of small wounds is one very precise action. I decided it was. I looked at the edge of Vance's screen, corporate login, a defense contractor logo I recognized. I will not name it here for reasons that will become obvious, but I will say it is a company with a DoD contract worth approximately $2.3 billion and a security protocol that is supposed to prevent exactly what I was looking at. A folder was open in the corner of the screen. The label read DoD Sys A12, Department of Defense System Architecture Files, on a public airplane Wi-Fi network, over the Pacific Ocean. I kept my face still. This is something you learn, not in training exactly, but in the accumulation of moments where your face cannot be the thing that gives you away. I kept it still, and I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my phone. Government issued, hardened casing, encrypted to a standard that most people have never had reason to understand. I opened a network analysis application and typed a single command. The aircraft Wi-Fi mapped in 11 seconds. 43 devices. Standard spread for a flight this size. Phones, tablets, laptops, the flight crew system, and then broadcasting in short encrypted packet bursts on a 6-second cycle. One machine that was not behaving like a consumer device. Vance's laptop. The packet pattern told me 2 things. 1, he was actively syncing files to an external server. 2, the encryption he was using was not the company's standard protocol. It was a third-party wrapper, the kind that is not authorized under any defense contractor security agreement I have ever reviewed, and I have reviewed more of them than most people know exist. I began mirroring his traffic silently. I want to be clear about what this means and what it doesn't mean. I was not hacking. I was observing transmissions that were being broadcast openly on a shared network. The legal distinction matters, though in this case, the legal question that would eventually be asked was not about me. Vance finished his coffee and went to the restroom. He left the laptop open. I had 90 seconds. I used them. When he came back, he walked straight through first class without stopping at my row. He had already forgotten about me by then, I think. I was the seat 34E woman with coffee on her jacket. I was Harper, who did tech support in a uniform. I was the background character. He had no idea what was running on my phone. I leaned back and watched the data flow. For 40 minutes, it was just me and the data and the sound of the engines. Then the plane shook. Not the gentle fluctuation of routine turbulence. This was structural, a sharp, hard drop that rattled the overhead bins and sent a plastic cup rolling down the aisle and produced the precise quality of silence that fills a cabin when 200 people simultaneously calculate their odds. The pilot's voice came through the intercom at 2:34 p.m. "Ladies Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Walsh speaking. We are experiencing an anomaly in our primary navigation system and are initiating precautionary protocols. We expect to have more information for you shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened. Precautionary protocols. I have heard pilots use that phrase. It is the phrase that means, this is not nothing, but I need 45 more seconds before I tell you what it is. The curtain between economy and first class does not block sound particularly well, and I heard Chloe's voice cut through the cabin almost immediately. That is completely unacceptable. You cannot leave us without information. And my father, I'd like to speak with someone. And Vance, predictably, threatening lawyers in the abstract the way people do when they need to perform control over a situation they cannot control. I sat still. I had not stopped running the mirror on Vance's data. In the turbulence interval, something had come through that changed the texture of what I was looking at. Not architecture files, personnel files, access credential logs for 3 separate DoD contractor systems, and a communication thread, partial, fragmented, but readable, between an address I didn't recognize and one I did, because it belonged to a division of the company that I had reviewed security protocols for 8 months ago. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I secured the data, encrypted the capture, and sent it to a single recipient, Colonel James Trent, Defense Security Service, Cybersecurity Division. 14 years in federal service. The man who, if I sent him a flagged packet capture from a DoD contractor on an open network, would know exactly what to do with it within the hour. I typed 2 words after the file, confirm receipt. His response came back in 4 minutes. Received. Do not lose him. I put the phone in my jacket pocket and kept my hands very still on my knees. The cockpit door opened at 2:51 p.m. I heard it before I saw it. A different quality of sound from the front of the plane. The particular pressure shift of that door moving. Then footsteps. Not the flight attendant's quick, efficient step. Longer, heavier, military cadence, though he was in a civilian captain's uniform. I had looked up Captain David Walsh when I checked into my seat assignment. Former naval aviator, 22 years active service, retired '06 before moving to commercial aviation. He had the posture of someone for whom military bearing had become structural, the way habits do when you keep them long enough. He walked through first class. My mother tried to flag him. He moved past her without slowing. Chloe stepped into the aisle and said something. I could hear the shape of it, the social authority she deploys in situations where she wants results. He walked past her too. He kept walking, past the business seats, through the curtain, down the economy aisle, row 34. He stopped. I was already unbuckling my seatbelt. The cabin had gone quiet the way it goes quiet when something happens that overrides individual social reality. Not politely quiet, but collectively quiet. The silence of 200 people experiencing the same sudden recalibration at the same time. Captain Walsh brought his heels together. His right hand came up to his temple. Sharp, precise. The salute you give to a general officer. Non-negotiable by regulation, non-performable by accident. You don't accidentally salute a general. You know what you're doing. General, ma'am. I stood. I returned the salute, and I heard it then. That sound moving through the cabin. That collective inhale and revision, starting somewhere in the rows behind me and spreading forward like a slow wave. I heard someone in the row ahead whisper, "Oh my God." I heard nothing from first class, which told me everything. Walsh spoke quietly, with the efficiency of someone who has delivered operational briefings under pressure and does not waste words. We have a confirmed navigation system failure, primary and secondary. The civilian weather window has closed. 3 airports within diversion range are shut due to a Pacific storm system that moved faster than forecast. We have one viable option for emergency landing. A pause, the length of a breath. Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam. But diverting a civilian aircraft into restricted military airspace requires command authorization from a senior officer with active clearance. He held the salute steady. We need your security code to proceed, General. Time is a factor. The flight attendant near the galley had not moved. The man to my left, who had held the armrest boundary aggressively since we left Chicago, had his hands folded in his lap. 200 people were looking at the woman with the coffee stain on her jacket. I reached into my pocket, took out the encrypted phone, typed the 12-character authorization sequence. You're cleared for emergency diversion, I said. Transmit code authorization Delta 7 to Pearl Harbor Tower. Copy that. He lowered his salute, turned back toward the cockpit with the practiced, unhurried speed of someone who has somewhere to be. Thank you, General. He was already walking. I sat back down. My hands were in my lap, steady. I looked straight forward at the seat back in front of me and breathed. In first class, no one was talking anymore. I didn't need to look. I knew the shape of what was happening up there. The slow, involuntary dissolution of the story they had been running for 15 years. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in stages. First disbelief, then the search for an alternative explanation, then the moment when there isn't one. I waited. After about 90 seconds, Chloe appeared at the curtain. She stood there, and I made her wait, and then I turned and looked at her. My sister's face had no performance left in it. The smirk was gone. The ease was gone. The comfortable authority of someone who has always been the one distributing the boarding passes. Gone. What was left was something I'd seen only a few times in our lives and always briefly. The real thing underneath. The girl who didn't quite know where she stood. She said, "Harper, I know about Vance," I said. Not loudly, just clearly. She blinked. What? He's been syncing restricted DoD files to an unauthorized third-party server from an open network at 37,000 feet. I've had the capture running for the last hour. It's already been received and flagged by DSS. She looked at me for a long time. He wouldn't. I'm going to need you to go back to your seat, I said. Federal agents will meet the plane at Hickam. It will be easier for everyone if he hasn't been warned. The color that left her face did not come back. She went back to her seat. I looked out the window at the Pacific. Enormous, flat, indifferent, and thought about the authorization code I'd just transmitted and the capture file Colonel Trent was already processing, and the fact that in approximately 2 hours we would be on the ground at a military installation where Vance Aldridge was going to have a very different kind of conversation than the one he'd been planning to have in Hawaii. My jacket still smelled like his coffee. I left it on. We landed at Pearl Harbor Hickam at 4:47 p.m. local time. The approach was smooth. Walsh was a good pilot, former Navy, and Pearl Harbor Tower had cleared our lane the moment the Delta 7 code came through. There were 2 vehicles on the tarmac when the stairs came down. Not the SUVs people imagine from movies. Just 2 dark government sedans. Unremarkable, parked at a precise angle, with 4 people in civilian clothes standing beside them, with the particular stillness of people who have been waiting and are not impatient about it. I recognized one of them, Special Agent Donna Park, DCIS, Defense Criminal Investigative Service, 12 years on contractor fraud and espionage cases. I had worked adjacent to 2 of her investigations. She was 44, Korean-American, 5'4", and had a reputation in the community for closing cases that other investigators called unworkable. She did not smile when she worked. She wasn't smiling now. Passengers were held on the aircraft for 40 minutes while the situation on the ground was coordinated. Flight attendants moved through the cabin with practiced calm, distributing water, running interference on questions. Captain Walsh made one additional announcement. There had been a security matter requiring federal coordination. The aircraft was fully safe. Hawaiian Airlines was arranging alternative transportation and accommodations. Everyone would be taken care of. He did not look at row 34 when he said it. He didn't need to. Vance Aldridge was removed from the aircraft before general boarding was released. I watched it from my window. 2 agents, 1 on each side, the specific geometry of a federal escort. Not rough, not dramatic, just inexorable. He was in his sport coat. He had his laptop bag. He looked smaller on the tarmac than he had in the aisle. Chloe was behind him. She had her arms wrapped around herself even though it was 81 degrees on the ground. She looked back up at the aircraft when she reached the tarmac. I don't know if she could see me through the window from that distance. I don't know if she was looking for me specifically. I like to think she was. Agent Park met me in a holding room near the gate area. Clean fluorescents, a table, 2 chairs. She put a recorder on the table and told me it was running and asked if that was fine. I said yes. The packet capture you transmitted to Colonel Trent, she said. Walk me through it. I walked her through it. She asked precise technical questions and I gave precise technical answers. And at no point did she ask anything that suggested she didn't understand exactly what I was describing. We were there for an hour and 40 minutes. The files on Vance's laptop, as it turned out, were not the largest part of the problem. The files were evidence of the problem, which was this. Vance Aldridge had been selectively leaking system architecture documentation to a competitor contractor. Not a foreign actor, which would have been worse, but a domestic competitor with a bid on the same DoD contract over a period of approximately 14 months. The third-party encryption wrapper on his transmissions was the same wrapper that competitor contractor's IT team had been using internally. This is called, in the legal terminology that would eventually appear on the indictment, theft of trade secrets in a federal contracting context. It carries a sentence of up to 10 years. It also, as Agent Park informed me with no particular inflection, constituted a violation of Vance's security clearance agreement, his employment contract, and several specific provisions of the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. He was looking at the end of his career at a minimum, at a ceiling of 10 years federal, at the maximum. I provided my full statement. I signed the documentation. I handed over a complete copy of the capture file. Agent Park shook my hand at the end, which was the first and only personal gesture in the entire 90 minutes. Thank you, General, she said. Clean work. He sat next to me, I said. She almost smiled. My parents were waiting in the main terminal when I came through. My father was sitting down. My mother was standing. They both looked like people who had been through something and were not entirely sure what. My father stood up when he saw me. He is 67 years old, my father. He was an engineer for 30 years, and then he retired and became someone who plays golf and laughs at his son-in-law's jokes. He is not a bad man. He is a man who took the easy story because no one offered him a harder one, and I had never offered him one, and I had done that on purpose, and standing there in the terminal I considered whether that choice was something I should revisit. He said, Harper, just my name. I said, Dad. He put his arms around me, and I let him, which is not something I do easily, and he held on for longer than usual, and I felt him exhale. I didn't know, he said. I know, I said. He pulled back and looked at me with the expression of a man confronting a very long mathematical error. 15 years of a story about tech support in a uniform, and the whole time the correct answer had been sitting right there correcting his work. Why didn't you? Because every time I tried to tell you, the conversation moved on, I said. So eventually, I stopped trying. That's on both of us. My mother had not moved. She had the good scarf still on, though it was askew now, and she was looking at me with something complicated that I did not fully have the vocabulary for. Grief, maybe. Or the thing that looks like grief when it is actually a recalibration, happening faster than a person can manage gracefully. She said, "Your sister," and then stopped. "I know," I said again. Chloe was with the federal agents. She was not under arrest. She had done nothing illegal, as far as anyone could determine, but she was being interviewed as a material witness with knowledge of her husband's professional activities. That interview was going to last several hours. At the end of it, she was going to have to make some decisions about what she had known and when. Those decisions were not mine to make for her. I left my parents in the terminal and walked out to the exterior of the base, past the checkpoint where a 22-year-old MP in full kit held the door with a precise, "Good evening, General," and I stood in the Hawaiian night air that smelled like salt and aviation fuel and the specific kind of warm dark that you only get at a military installation near the ocean, and I thought about all the times I had sat at my family's dinner table and listened to them explain my own life back to me. 15 years is a long time to let a wrong story run. I had let it run because correcting it felt like arguing, and arguing felt like needing something from people who had decided they already knew. But the thing about a story that isn't corrected is that it doesn't stay still. It grows. It gets passed around. It becomes the version everyone operates from, and eventually you're sitting in seat 34E with someone's coffee soaking through your jacket because the story says that's where you belong. I was not angry anymore. I want to be clear about that. Whatever anger I had, and there had been some quiet and precise and running underneath everything for years, had completed its work and was finished. The captain's salute had been the last piece of it. Not because it was validation exactly, but because it was accuracy. The world had corrected its own record, publicly, at 37,000 feet, in front of 200 witnesses and one live social media stream that Chloe had not gotten around to turning off before it happened. I checked my phone. 14 texts from numbers I didn't recognize, which meant people who'd been on the flight. 47 missed calls, which meant the story was already outside the aircraft. The clip of the salute, someone had filmed it, of course, because someone always films it, had been posted to 3 platforms and was being shared in real time. I put the phone away. Colonel Trent called at 9:15 p.m. He told me the capture file had been processed, the timeline had been reconstructed, the competitor contractor's IT team was being contacted, and Vance Aldridge's security clearance had been revoked as of 6 p.m., pending the full investigation. He said, "Good catch, General," in the way that people in this work say it. Not with surprise, because surprise would imply they'd expected otherwise, but with satisfaction. The satisfaction of a system working correctly. I said, "He sat next to me." There was a brief pause. "He really did," Trent said. Vance was formally charged 11 weeks later. Theft of trade secrets, violation of federal contracting regulations, unauthorized transmission of controlled technical data. His attorney entered a not guilty plea that no one in the relevant communities considered likely to survive contact with the evidence. The company terminated him the morning after the arrest. Chloe filed for separation 2 months after Hawaii. She did not call me to talk about it. She posted about it eventually, vague, curated, the language of a person performing a particular kind of strength. And I saw it because someone sent it to me, and I thought about her face on the tarmac, arms around herself in the heat, looking back up at the aircraft. I sent her one text. "I'm here if you want to talk." She didn't respond for 6 weeks. Then, one night at 11:40 p.m., my phone lit up. "I didn't know about the files," she wrote. "I need you to know I didn't know." I thought about it for a moment. "I believe you," I wrote back. "That's a place to start. It is not a resolution. It is not the end of something or the beginning of something else. Not cleanly. It is just 2 people in their late 30s deciding, slowly and without ceremony, whether there is enough left to work with. I don't know yet, but I grew up with her. And despite everything, the boarding pass, the smirk, the easy laugh at my expense, she is my sister, and 15 years of a wrong story goes both ways. What I know is this. I flew back from Hawaii in first class, on a military transport arranged by the base, because that is the arrangement when a general officer needs repatriation from an unplanned diversion. It is not a perk. It is just logistics. But the seat was wide and the light was good, and somewhere over the Pacific the crew brought me coffee, hot, in a proper cup. And I held it easily and looked out at the dark water 37,000 feet below. And I thought about seat 34E, about the man with the territorial elbow, and the lavatory smell, and the crumpled boarding pass, and the coffee soaking through my jacket, and Chloe's face when she handed it over, and the particular quality of satisfaction she'd taken from it. She gave me that seat. Because of where she put me, I was sitting 3 rows from Vance when he opened his laptop. I've thought about that more than once. She handed me exactly the right seat to see exactly the wrong thing. The world doesn't usually land that neatly. When it does, you accept it. I accepted it.